guys, continuing with adjectives this week, we're going to talk about comparing with more and most. Here we go. All right, comparing with more and most. Let's look at the rules. Rule number 1, we add more and most to form the comparative and superlative forms of most adjectives with 2 or more syllables. All right, let's look at the example in our rule box using more. His story is more interesting than mine. So first, to determine why they used more, we have to look at how many things we're comparing. We use more when we're comparing 2 things, the comparative form. We're comparing his story to my story. That's 2 things. So we know we're going to use more. Now, why do we use more instead of adding ER to the end of the adjective interesting? Because interesting, let's see how many syllables. Interesting. There's 4 syllables. So typically, if we have an adjective with 2 or more syllables, we'll add more when we're comparing 2 things. All right, let's take a look at the example in our rule box of when we would use most. Hank's story was the most interesting. So here it implies that we're comparing Hank's story to several other stories. Out of all the stories, his was the most interesting. So we use most when we're comparing more than 2 things. That would be the superlative form. And again, because interesting has 4 syllables, when there's more than 2, we say more or most before the adjective. Rule number 2, never use more or most before an adjective that ends in ER or EST. The best example I can give you is one that we hear people do all the time. More, better. Remember, better is the comparative form of good. We have good, better, best. Good is the base, better is comparative, best is superlative. So because we've changed that good to better, we don't say more before it. You do one or the other. You either add ER or EST to the end, or you add more or most before the adjective. Never do both. All right, let's look on your activity page 56 at part A and go over the instructions and number 1 so that you will have a better understanding of what to do once you've completed this instructional video. Part A says, underline the correct comparative or superlative adjective in the sentences. Number 1, his story was about the most successful or successfulest prince who ever lived. All right, so you'll notice before the adjective they have most. What's the rule? If we say most, do we still add EST to the end of the adjective? No, it has to be one or the other. And we know it's not going to be successfulest because successful has how many syllables? 3. So we know that we're going to say most successful. So you would underline successful. All right, and now let's look at part B on page 56. Part B says write the correct form of the adjective in parentheses to complete each sentence. Number 6, how did it happen that the prince was blank than others? Fortunate is our adjective. All right, first let's look at the syllables. Fortunate. That's 3 syllables. So we know that we are going to choose more or most. How did it happen that the prince was more fortunate or most fortunate than others? So we're comparing 2 things here. We're comparing prince to others. So because we're comparing 2 things, are we going to use more or most? The correct answer is more. How did it happen that the prince was more fortunate than others? So on the blank, you would write more fortunate. All right, there's your lesson on comparing with more and most. You may now complete page 56 of your language arts. If you have any questions or need any help, you know where to find me. And I love you and have a great day.